Third episode, Carbon Bubble.
Yeah,
This is a Carbon Bubble. We are going to discuss about the climate financial risk, how they impact the world and the society in a financial way. And this is Jinsu from Korea.
this is Sohyun from London.
Nice to meet you all. And what is today's topic, Soya?
Um, well, we named it as like economics of climate change, but I'm really not an expert on this field. So could you please tell me what was the first time for economists to link up with the environment? Because it's quite a different topic, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, a lot of people saying is the environment itself is a very, very different topic to economics, but these days, economics are interested in environment, and there
Yeah.
was a scholar called Figu, and he was the first economist who developed some policy about the environment, because he thought that in the economy market, that means in our economy activity, there is unintended externality. I mean,
Oh,
it's like a side effect. So, for example, you and I make a contract, but during the contracts, even though we are not intending, we could harm someone. Like, for example, I make some coal, and I sell it to Soyan. Soyan just use it, right?
right.
And there will be some waste or like carbon dioxide.
Ah, okay.
Actually, at that time, he explained it by lever. And for example, if the factory is near the levers, even though it is not intended, the people who live in the lever will suffer by the pollution of the factories, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So Figo saw that it is unfair. It is unfair to people who live in the river, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he argued that there should be a tax,
Ah, to the polluters.
yes, to polluters. But what is the best rate of the tax? That was the question. Can you
Right.
imagine how much amount of the tax should be imposed to factories or consumer?
Hmm. Yeah, it's a difficult question because it's kind of a new concept back then. And when was it? When was the period of this time?
Uh yeah, it could be related to time and the periods,
Mhm.
but people thought that the more important thing is the damage. They need to compensate the damage.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it does not matter to put supply side or consumer side,
Both
because
sides.
we can put both, but it does not
Mhm.
matter.
It
If
does matter, really.
I know it could be better, but in terms of economics, in terms of efficiency, it does not matter to put on consumer side or producer side, because once the tax imposed to any side, the market will share the tax. Depends on the market power. It does not matter, but it will be very efficient. But
Hmm.
largely, okay. Do you want to say something?
Ah, interesting. Because I thought I heard about the polluters pay principle,
Yes.
and it's interesting that the taxes, no matter, so it's like imposed to the polluters and also the consumer, because the tax is like fairly applied to both. Interesting.
Because no, people thought that consumer are also polluter.
Ah, okay.
So actually, the supplier made the goods for consumer, right? So it could be unfair just argue or just require tax only on suppliers or manufacturers. So it could be very, very hard questions. So once this kind of debate or discussion started,
Mm-hmm.
all of the tax issue will just go away.
Ah,
So Pigu thought that the most important thing is about the tax amount. The tax amount should be determined by the damage amount, of the people who live in the river. And then market will share the burden. And this is the start of the environment economics and the public economics.
okay. Then how did this concept evolved to the environmental policy?
Actually, there was some environmental policy before. We call
Mhm.
it control and command. For example, I already told you there if there is a factory in the river, people will suffer, right? So
Right?
before this kind of tax, people usually just shut down the factories, right? But what if the damage of the shutdown of the factory is bigger than the damage of the river people?
Hmm.
It's in terms of society, social value, it could be not efficient, right?
Right, it's a loss.
So Pico thought it is much more better because just let market decide. If the compensation of the damage is too huge, then naturally some consumer or supplier will stop. Then we just
Mhm.
compare the cost and the benefit very easily. So I think Pico is a very simple guy. Want to simplify everything. So and this concept developed to carbon tax.
So I see the transition of the initial concept was we call it environment, but now in the days, environmental topics kind of narrowed down to climate change, right?
Yes. And I will talk about the carbon tax and the ETS more deeply later. But
Mm.
the carbon tax, it is so politically hard to impose because they usually put tax on fuel. So it is so hard to implement it in one regions or country. But so economics in 1960, one American economist invented another policy called emission trading systems. So they thought, okay, don't put tax, just give them the amount. Theoretically, the result, the policy, if okay, 이거 자를게. So interesting, right? So
Interesting, yeah. So
and
emission trading scheme, that's the one you called ETS.
yes, so
Ah,
carbon tax then developed to ETS. I will just explain very shortly in here, but we will talk about next episode. And so this is the basic thought and the perspective of the economies.
interesting. Yeah, it's in the economic standpoint, everything has to be cost effective, which is yeah, in my opinion, climate change has always been a topic very subjective, hard to quantify, but definitely it's a different perspective.
Yes, it's a very different topics, and it is also very related to welfare economics.
Welfare.
Welfare economics.
Mhm.
In here, the welfare means it's like a social value,
Ooh,
like
okay.
the societal capital, something like that. So economists want to maximize it,
Mhm. Maximize what?
maximize the welfare, the whole
Ah,
welfare,
maximize the welfare.
the societal welfare.
Overall, is it?
Yes.
Ah, okay.
So they believe efficiency is the key.
So can you tell us more about the relationship between carbon tax and ETS? How is it different, and how did it evolve?
Oh, I can explain it very shortly, but the carbon tax is have to be imposed to fuel, right? Because the carbon dioxide itself is like air, right? We cannot measure that, right? We can only measure the fuel before they use it, or when they use, right? So carbon tax usually put tax on the fuels. However, ETS is focused on the CO2 amount. It does not matter how many fuel they use. They only focus about the emission itself. And carbon tax usually just put tax on the manufacturers. It does not matter how they efficient. But ETS is very different. For example, if Soyan is given about 100 CO2 allowance,
Mhm.
it means that Soyan are allowed to emit 100 CO2 tons every year. So what if Soyan emit about 110 CO2 ton? Then Soyan have to buy from other people who have a surplus allowance, right?
So
And
who made this allowance?
who, what did you say?
So who give me this allowance? Who
Oh,
set this boundary?
government.
Ah,
Government
okay.
set the boundary, and your question is right. So I think you are asking about who decide 100, right?
Right, who decide?
There are two ways to decide your amount. One is benchmark index, one is historical grandfathering method. So government track your history. Okay, so yeah, I think you average emit about 100 every year, or I will give you 100. And benchmark index is very different. They just compare the other companies. Like, hey, Jinsu, I think Jinsu emit about 80. Why you can't? So
Ah,
they
okay.
define some benchmark and
Mm-hmm.
let them be the standard.
Interesting. So I as long as I know, there are a lot of many countries who has ETS system. So it differs from the countries if they are following benchmark or grandfather, what is the most
Popular.
trendy way?
Well, trendy one is absolutely is benchmark index, because it is hard. It is very, very hard for company, because they so ETS is so important policy in our society, especially ETS has a very huge advantage. We call it political feasibility.
Hmm.
I mean, of course, it sounds very weird, but so EU is famous for EU ETS, right?
Ah, okay. I heard about it. Yeah.
But EU actually was about to impose carbon tax before.
Is it the EU carbon border mechanism?
No, it's different concept. I will talk about it later, but it's a
Ah,
different
sorry.
concept. But it is highly related, very highly related to this concept.
Looking forward to that. Yeah.
Anyhow, so all of this policy, we call it carbon pricing policy.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to tell you for the last things, you say how 100 CO2 ton allowance are determined, right? It is
Mm-hmm.
actually determined by the national determined contribution or national goal. So basically, it is highly also related to ambition of the climate policy.
Ah, okay. Yeah. For the background, National Determined Contribution is called NDC, which is from the UN's Climate Change Conference. We call it UNFCCC's National Climate Pledge, right?
Yes. And it is the most important terminology you have to remember. NDC is like if I want to call it like a national homework.
National homework.
Yes. With
And
something
it's the
like
due.
country have to do, but they
Mhm.
might fail, you know.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, is there any
So,
something that you
mhm.
want to ask?
I have a lot of homework to do after this call because all the economic concept you said, it's very unfamiliar to me and I need to learn a lot. So my last question is, I would love to look, I would love to search more about this topic. Then could you please recommend any economist, climate change economist that I should look into? And could you please explain why is climate change so important to the economist?
Well,
Why does it matter? Yeah.
there are a lot of economists who are even now researching about climate change. But if I have to pick some scholars, I'd like to say the Lord Stones, Nicholas Stone, is the most famous and the most respected economist in terms of climate change, because in 2006, he published a study review. It was the first time, not to argue that we need to put economic policy on carbon emissions to limit the climate, just the temperature of the global society. And it is very, very meaningful because he just compare the cost of the mitigation cost and to the benefit of the avoid damage. So what I mean is avoided damage means if we cost, like for example, like $100 this year, our next generation damage will decrease by like $1,000, something like that. So in his
accumulating.
So in his perspective, it is so cheap. Even though it looks so huge of the cost of the renewable energy, something like that, but it looks so small compared when we started to compare the damage. So I already explained this kind of concept before. It is very similar to Pigouvian tax.
Yeah, I should write down Nicholas Stern and then Google after this.
Yes. Another person is Nicholas Stone. he is very, very famous for Nobel Prize.
Wow.
He got Nobel Prize uh, by climate change issue. He invented modeling, like
Mhm.
if we continue to emit like this, the future generation damage will like this. If we change the past,
Mhm.
the damage will be smaller, something like that. It was
What
like
is that modeling called?
DICE model.
I.
Dynamic integrated climate economy. So he just combined the climate impact with economy activity. So actually, his famous book is called Climate Casino.
Casino. Okay.
Yeah, because he thought like people try to gambling, try gamble like a dice,
So we are gambling against climate change.
Yes, they know on Earth,
Interesting. On Earth, the destiny of the Earth.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
So they I don't know he intended or not, but the model, that's why his model called dice,
Interesting. Yeah, I would love to talk more about that in the next episode. So thank you so much, Jinsu. I learned so many things, new concept today. I'll definitely look into it. And any last word you want to, any last thing you want to talk about?
No, it was very, very interesting and a meaningful time for me. I'd like to talk more about this issue later, but one last thing is that the economy is always thought that it is possible to solve the climate change if we think about the damage of the climate change. So that's why we put some carbon tax and the carbon pricing. In some point I totally agree with that. So anyhow, thank you for listening. Next episode could be shorter.
Bye.
Bye.